So what I'm going to share with you today are some thoughts based on a paper that I worked on with Minsuk Pong that appears in GIS that I've extended in the slide deck and added some extra advice on how to manage revisions. The presentations from revision to acceptance, a guide to navigating the R&R journey. And I had these dreams of making this feel like The Hobbit, and I gave them up because I'm just not that graphically talented. So, but I do have a map. So you submit your paper, you get the revision, and then you have one of two things happen, right? You get another revision where you get rejected. And then eventually, if you don't get rejected by the third or fourth round, you might get an acceptance. Okay. This is a pretty typical pattern. And the most difficult time are the first two revisions. It's R1, where perhaps the senior editor is taking a risk, or it's R2, where at least today they're telling senior editors like me, this is when we should really decide. If the paper is going to make it past R2 at the quarterly or at ISR, because Super gave the same advice as I was leaving, we really should plan to accept the paper. Your chances of being rejected get lower and lower and lower after you cross that second mountain. So how to get there? Okay. The first thing to get there in terms of getting there is you need to understand that most revise and resubmits fail, not because you have a bad idea, it's because how you respond to the feedback. So you really have to carefully think through how you revise and explain what you're doing. The second thing to think about here is reviewers often don't really say what they're thinking, right? So you really have to go through and carefully read the review package and decode or really think through what are they really telling me? And I'll give you some examples of turns of phrase they use that actually say completely rewrite the paper, but they won't tell you to completely rewrite the paper because the editor doesn't want them to say that. Okay, we're told not to ask for that kind of change. Okay. The third thing where I see revisions fail, and I see this happen a lot, even with my own projects, co-authors don't get along. Okay, and co-authors start finger pointing and whatnot. So you really have to learn how to manage collaboration without getting too angry and without pointing the finger at somebody for something that went wrong along the way. Okay, and this is where the Hobbit metaphor kicked in. But anyways, the next thing to think about here is it's not just that you're a good writer. Okay? It's you're really good at thinking strategically. A good friend of mine is a chess player. He says when he thinks about revisions, he always thinks not about this revision, but the next one after. You want to think strategically and to think through two steps ahead. You also want to think about how you structure your team's work, and you really want to think about the tone. I recently managed a paper at ISR where I had met with the authors and I said, hey, it's okay if you take a tough tone with your reviewers. Tough is fine. Calling them stupid in the review package, not fine. Okay, so you really have to think through your tone, and you call them stupid not with that word, but by the way you respond and go, yeah, you don't really know what you're talking about. It's like, well, we thought about that and we tried something different. Okay, and then finally, what I'll leave you with are some tactics, templates, and hopefully a little confidence that when you think about taking the pain of a revision and turning it into a publication. I don't know how all of you are trained, but what I was trained by my advisor is you have to have an agenda. So here's my agenda slide. That's all I'm going to say about it, right? But as you go back and look at the slide deck, or you listen to this someday, here are the 7 acts with the mini vignettes under 3 big tasks. Okay, so the first thing to understand about revisions beyond my 5 talking points is understand they vary in terms of tractability and level of effort. Okay, and you really want to sit down and ask yourself, when you get this, is this doable? And that's kind of a yes/no question. That's part of our 2x2. And how much effort is it? Is this really easy or is this really not easy? Okay, typically when I think about this, you have tractable low effort revisions, and hopefully these are in the first round of revision, but almost never, right? Usually you get these in the third. Okay, then you have what I call the surgical strike. I've got to rework the theory, I've got to rerun the data, but I know I can do it. Okay, and then you have the impossible revision, which isn't going to have a lot of effort, but it's impossible because you either don't have a theory or you don't have the data. And I see this happen a lot, particularly with qualitative papers and more recently empirical papers, where the reviewers say, oh, wouldn't it be nice if you had this one variable? And you think to yourself, well, if I had this one variable, I'd be in a better journal, right? You go, well, I got to go get new data. Okay, so which is pretty tough for most of us. And then finally, there's the high effort impossible revision, which is what I most often get myself at MISQ, ISR, GMIS, GIS. I can give you a long list. And they want a studs up renovation. They want a full rebuild, right? And there they want a new model, they want a new data, new framing. And you ask yourself when you get this revision, why do I have a revision? This isn't a revision, it's a new paper, right? And if you haven't had this experience yet, I promise you it'll happen someday. But the good news with all of these types of revisions, you're still in the game. You have some direction on what you need to do, right? You have some hope, right? And the response you have in terms of how you think and how you organize the team should really be revolve around that 2x2 grid of what's tractable and how much work. If it's a relatively minor revision, just do it yourself. Send it to the team for sign off. If it's a really deep, challenging revision, right? Don't. Take a step back and think. So the tractable low effort revision, get it done quickly. I made the mistake in my first GMIS paper of getting a relatively minor revision in the third round, and I didn't send it back quickly. And the editor-in-chief actually emailed me 3 weeks later and said, well, this wasn't very much work. Do you really want the paper? I stayed up all night and finished the paper. Okay. But if it's low effort, the editor wants it back quickly. And I'll often put that in my senior editor letter. I'll say, I'd like this back in 60 days. Get it back in 60 days. Okay, show the statement of goodwill. If it's a doable but high effort revision, get everyone together, plan, prioritize, demonstrate value through doing a good job. Okay. Again, just because it's doable doesn't mean it's a lack of effort, and that can be pretty frustrating. Usually, when I get one of these revision packages, I swear a lot. I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired of it. Okay, but it's doable, and you should console yourself. Well, it's just one more round, maybe two, and it's over with. With impossible, unwelcome surprises, you have one of two alternatives. You go get new data, or you get a new theory, or both. Or you sit down and you carefully think, how can I explain I don't have this option? And this is where you want to write a letter to your senior editor. Okay, and you want to say, look, this is the data we have. We can work with the data we have, but it's quite limited. Here are the alternatives. And this doesn't happen as often as you might think, and I don't get very many letters like this, but most often we can sort of figure something out if what they have is there's still a contribution without that new data or that extensive change. But this means you have to be proactive, and we'll talk about this in a little bit in reaching out to the editor. And then finally, there's that full rebuild. And here, there's not a choice. You have to contact the editor. There is an element of negotiation about expectations. And even after the editor has signed off, they'll say, well, it all depends on whether you do it well, which is inherently unsatisfying. But here's the thing. If you're a doctoral student and you're early in your career and you have an MISQ or ISR, if that gets accepted right about the time you graduate, you are golden for the job market. And you're in a really great position. So any one of these four things is a positive outcome, and you just have to do them. The biggest mistake you can make is not sending the paper back. Okay, so how do you discriminate between cells in the grid? This is where you read the reviews, and you have to really read them carefully. And I'll share the slides with Anchor-Tring because I don't want to read everything. But what you really have to do, in terms of my next slide, what you really have to do is actually approach this as a translator and be a bit of a reviewer whisperer. And that's where you get out and you look at all the turns of phrase and you ask yourself what it really means. If a reviewer says the contribution is unclear, it means they don't buy it, right? And so you've got to do some explaining. The theoretical framing could be strengthened. Usually it means, yeah, I don't really believe in your theory. You actually didn't use it appropriately, or you've got the wrong theory. Okay, this is interesting, but usually that means they want to reject the paper. I'm about to deliver a body blow. If you watch luchadores in Mexican wrestling, this is when they go up on the ropes and they're about to drop on you and do a pile driver. The method is novel but underdeveloped. That means they actually don't believe you ran the method right. Okay, and what they're really asking you is not necessarily for a new method. They're asking for you to explain what you did and perhaps even offer the data. Okay, I encourage the authors to consider additional analyses. If you're doing empirical work, it's robustness checks, right? And if you've done any of these lately, they're going to be 5,000 robustness checks. It's ridiculous, but you just do them. The writing could be improved for clarity. That usually honestly means they didn't read the whole paper. Okay, your writing just isn't clean enough. And in that case, you need to either go find someone that can write, or you need to hire a copy editor to help you. Okay. The manuscript raises interesting questions. This is the comment I hate the most when it comes in a review package, because what they're really saying is you didn't answer any of the questions. And I feel like I have, right? And so you have to take a step back and ask yourself, how did they not understand my answers? Which usually means a pretty deep rewrite. And usually by the time one of my papers goes out, I've touched it 12 times, I'm sick of it. Okay, I'm losing patience. And then finally, I recommend a major revision. That's a beautiful phrase, but the challenge with that, usually it means they want another 2 revisions, right? They want this revision, and then they want the right to comment, and then they want an X round. So that's a little bit of the reviewer love language that you all will enjoy the next few years. But they're all tractable if you understand what they're saying, right? Your contribution is unclear. I'm not convinced. Well, once you get in your mind, it's not your word choice, it's that you're not convincing. Now you know what to do. Okay. And usually for me, my self-esteem just dives. Like I read one of these things, and this is my 23rd year as a faculty member. It's my 26th or 27th year doing academic research. I still get bummed after reading reviews. Okay, it's really normal. Read the review, feed the comments, go take a walk, go do something to feel better, right? And what you have to do after this point usually is rebuild yourself a little bit. The first thing I encourage you to remember is, you know what? You got an R&R. 60-70% of papers at top journals, if you're at the UT Dallas, get rejected in the first round. Like, it's really tough. Okay, if you get through the second round, the numbers all go down. Once you get into the third and fourth round, you're almost at that 90% confidence level of acceptance, even if they're saying mean words. Okay. Remind yourself what the critiques are about are not you. Even if you have a really fussy or unpleasant reviewer that's particularly direct and says, like, the authors don't know what they're doing. No, it means your manuscript hasn't shown you know what you know. Okay. Usually at this point in time, if I get one of these, I call my girlfriend or I call my one of my mentors and I go, I feel terrible. I got this awful revision. Have a friend that's a safe space you can call and talk to this about. If you're sitting in a German chair, there's usually at least one nice person at the chair. That was a joke. But usually there's somebody you can talk to, right? And so just take care to find those people. One thing I do once in a while, if I have a stack of papers I think are really awful, and I go and I look at theirs and I go, my paper is better than yours. Now, I will never give you my list. Okay, but it's nice to remember that there are papers that are not as good as what I'm working on that made it through. Because for me, that's a little bit of hope and inspiration. I'm hoping I get treated in a similar way. Also, another way I do this is I think to myself, I'm working with a team. This seems like an impossible mountain to climb, but I'm not climbing all of the mountain myself. And I sit down and I think through, okay, I work with this guy, Phil Roth. He's the OB/IO Psych guy. He's great with theory. I work with another guy, Phil Bobko. I call them the 2 Phils. Phil's really good with method and detail. I may be working with an early career person who's learning the process, who's willing to put in the sweat equity to go review 1,000 papers. Right. But what's helpful with this metaphor is I don't have to do it all myself. That doesn't mean I'm outsourcing it all, right? But it means I have help. And that way you don't feel alone, so you feel a little bit better. And then the final thing I like to do is I take a walk. I go find a nice quiet place where there aren't a lot of people because I'm feeling grumpy. And I just go take a walk. And after my walk, I take a nap because, naps are good. And then usually once I've gone through this process, so if I grumble to a friend, I think about, who's going to help me? I take my walk, I take my nap. I start feeling a little better because the revision's doable. And this is really important. You have to change your mindset to go from being discouraged to feeling like you can do it. Okay. So this is my beautiful image I created for it. Before reading reviews, I feel good. I read the reviews, I feel like garbage. And then I take my walk and I talk to my partner and she helps me out. Okay. Once you're back, okay, once you start feeling okay, that's when you have to really start planning the work. Don't start planning it when you're in the dumps. If you start trying to plan your revision strategy when you're not feeling good, you're going to feel overwhelmed. Okay. And since our field is pretty generous and usually gives 3 to 6 months to revise the paper, you can take a week or two to feel better, right? To me, it's kind of bizarre we're this kind, but it's just the norm. Okay. So now once you get there, you have 3 things you have to do. Okay, the first thing you have to do is go back to that data dictionary I just gave you of the reviews and actually read them. Like really read them. And look for things across all the reviews that are reasonably consistent. If everybody's questioning the contribution, you didn't do your storytelling well. If everybody's nitpicking on different parts of the method, you didn't report something cleanly. Okay. If everybody's questioning the theory, maybe you have the right theory, but you haven't explained it as well as you could have, or you need to add nuance to that theory, or you've got the wrong theory, right? And which unfortunately feels a little bit like parking, but in our peer review processes, you still see people say in the second round, you've got the wrong theory, give me a new one, right? The hypotheses don't change, the explanation does. Okay. Then you actually have to revise the manuscript, and I'll go into more detail on each of these points. And then you actually have to write the response. And in my experience, the response document often is more important than the actual changes. Okay, because you have to explain to people why you agreed, you disagreed, and you have to show them respect. You have to make them feel heard. And if they think that they're heard, they think you made a good faith effort, they're far more likely to say yes to the manuscript in the end. Okay. So task 1, themes and priorities. Now a lot of this, especially the color coding, comes from Minsook. Minsook may have the hottest hand in publication in the field right now. Like he seems every 2 weeks, I feel like he's getting a management science or an ISR or MISQ, and I feel a little bit of envy. But he's good at this because he really thinks through his responses. So as you read that first high level piece, look for that consistency in critiques. Okay, what are they calling for? Okay. Also go back and read the SE report and read the AE report. And when you read that report, take note of which reviewers do they cite the most. No one will tell you that R1 is most important, but if R1 is mentioned 10 times and R3 is mentioned once, they're listening to R1. Okay, so take some time with that. Look for where the consistent points are across reviewers. If there's something they consistently cite as a theoretical or empirical problem, you've got to address it, right? And then what Minsook suggests, and I've never done this myself, he uses color coding, and he goes through the document and he marks everything he thinks is hard red and everything he thinks is easy green. And he says that helps him prioritize. Because when he goes back and makes the comparisons, he can go, okay, I have 3 red lights on theory, I have 2 green lights on method, I have no lights on writing. Okay. So what I would do in terms of thinking through identifying those themes, and this is the hardest part. Okay. What you need to do is you need to print the document, and your generation doesn't like paper because you're saving the trees. Okay, another joke, sort of, haha. But really, I print it out and I spread it out in front of me because I can't fit it all on my monitor. Okay, and then I try to, and once I've gone through and I've looked at it and I've started highlighting, that's where I start looking for those recurring issues. And if I can physically stack things on top of each other or make post-it notes, it's a lot simpler than using Trello or some other tool. Okay, this is assuming that you have a big table that you can use. Okay, and then the next thing I do is I make a map of concerns. I kind of create a matrix of this is reviewer 1 wants this. Okay, here's their comment. And I'll do this part digitally, and I'll start clustering the comments together. Because what can happen is if you have a very complicated revision, you'll find contradictory comments, right? So if you cluster them together visually on a screen, you can go, okay, R1 wants this, R2 wants this, R3 wants this. I can't do all 3. And then I think, okay, let me go look at the SE report and see if it's mentioned, okay, or the A report and see if it's mentioned. And then I can start thinking about who do I prioritize? And if the SE says this must be done, it must be done, right? And if R3 contradicts the SE, then you write a really nice explanation to R3. And the SE's intuition was right. It didn't work, right? But you have to send a signal that you actually did some work on the topic. Okay. Other things that I look for. Okay, and this is important. Okay, because our review panels in IS tend to be drawn from 3 to 4 countries. Okay, with 3 to 4 different forms of English, I really take care to go through those documents and try to decompose the words. If a German tells me something's okay, that usually means it's pretty damn good. Okay, if an American says something's okay, that usually means it's not very good. Okay, and if a Chinese person says it's okay, it usually means it's terrible. Okay, there are different ways of managing their word choices. Now you're guessing what the culture is of the person behind the comments, right? But I do go and look for those different word choices to try to tease it apart. Okay. What I also try to do is I try to go, okay, when I go back to my paper, I look at my paper and I ask myself, what did I want to get through? And if none of the reviewers can see my message, I've got a problem in storytelling. Right. And we write our papers because we have stories we want to tell. We have things that we want to explain. But if it's missing, you've got to go back and revisit everything. Okay. What you also want to do once you've done all of this is then identify 3 to 5 big things you're going to do. And that's the anchor of your revision strategy. This is the hardest part of a revision. Okay. Is thinking through how I'm going to get this done. Okay. And then you have to ask the question, and this is really important because when I was early career, like many of you, I used to blame the reviewers. I'm like, stupid reviewers, they didn't get it. And then Vern Grover sat me down, and he was my IS mentor in the first part of my career at my first job. He said, Jason, because I was grumbling really badly one day, he goes, usually something's wrong with your story. It's you, it's not them. Stop complaining, which is very direct, right? But he wasn't wrong. Like when I actually stepped back and looked at it, my introduction wasn't very good. I ran out of energy when I wrote the contribution. The theory wasn't as contextualized as it might have been. And keep in mind how we contextualize theory is constantly evolving, right? You can read Johns, you can read Hong, there's something else today. Often that reviewer is more ahead of you on some of this stuff than you are, or more is ahead of you, excuse me. So take some time to really think through what the problem is, what's the source, and ultimately, because it's up to you to fix, take accountability. Okay, then write the revision strategy. Okay, and what this is and this is important. You write revision strategies to share with the editor, but really what the revision strategy does is it lines your team up together. It gets everybody together and thinking, okay, this is the trajectory of the revision, right? It's a management tool. So even if you send this off to the senior editor, and I get a revision strategy once every couple of weeks, okay, by the time that paper comes back, I don't remember what we said. I have to go pull it. But if you do this well, right, this identifying 3 to 5 big changes, identifying who the source of concern is, and what the solutions are collectively through a couple of rounds, the team will work a lot better. And that's really important for getting this done. Again, so color code if you're MinSook. With me, I put like major and I put minor. Okay, everybody's got a different style. Flag anything that the group disagrees on. Okay, and usually we do disagreements over email. Okay, or you'll have a quick call if it's a big thing you get stuck, and have a group meeting, and then try to put something together that's 1.5 to 2 pages. Okay, and that may not seem like very much, but also as you're doing this, think through your senior colleague, your doctor fathers, doctor mothers, or just doctor advisors, right? I'm not even convinced my advisor read most stuff I sent him as a doc student. Yeah, and I love my advisor. He was great. He gave me wonderful advice. But I'll never forget when he looked at my 3rd iteration of my dissertation essay and he said, "Yeah, I'm only going to read this one more time before you graduate." And I was like 18 months out. Okay, because they're busy. So keep it short, keep it focused. Your senior editor, typically, if it's at ISR MISQ, typically is looking at, I think 6-7 manuscripts a month. Okay, that's a lot of reading, right? So if you keep it short, I'm going to look at it and give it attention. If you make it too long, it's not very helpful. But remember, the reason you do this exercise is to get your team aligned. It's not just to get me, the senior editor, aligned with you. Okay. Now I'll look at it, and if I see a red flag, I'll tell you. I'll often send it to my associate editor who will send it back to me. And almost every time the associate editor, if it's a good AE, will point out some method problem you're not addressing. Okay. If not, they'll say, sure, it looks fine, but only if they do it well. Right? Okay. So remember, it's you, it's not the editors that have to do this. It's you that have the problem, not the editor. I don't get hurt if I reject your paper. You may not like me, but the rest of the field will never know unless you tell them. Okay. You, on the other hand, take a lot of pain. So you've got to be really accountable at this stage. Okay. So here's the revision strategy, and back to my Hobbit motif. You know, we build it out, we try it this way, we try that way. Usually there are a couple missteps, and remember that. Okay, especially if you're collecting new data. I have one MIS quarterly. I think we published it with 4 studies in it. We actually did 6. We did 6 because we screwed up the manipulation. That was on us. You know, these things happen. You just have to be pretty forgiving with each other. Okay. But what that forgiveness means is you have to navigate egos. Okay. And not everybody has an equal voice at the table, right? The senior person often has a disproportionate voice. The first author has a disproportionate voice. If you're second, third, or fourth author, which I most often am, you don't actually have the biggest voice. Okay. So the way you manage this, okay, is the way you use certain phrases which imply we all share this responsibility. We've all learned a lot since the first submission, right? So nobody's at fault if the data is not perfect. Because if you make people feel guilty, they stop working. And I need you to work. Let's focus on the future. If people start bickering about how things are being done, okay, you're right. That's really interesting. What do we do next? Get people looking forward versus back. Use language that invites collaboration. This is what I really like, is when one of my early career collaborators sends me a response document and they say, hey, I went through the reviews, and they actually start the response, right? They break it out point by point. They say, here's what I think is important to do. Okay. And they make it easy for me, the senior person, to skim through it, right? And then they say, how do you want to tackle each of these comments? And often they'll put in how they think to tackle the comment. And it's much easier for me to respond to, say, Anne-Katrine or Rishika's points than for me to come up from scratch, right? And this is where you take control of me as the senior person. You're not really giving me work, but you're giving me opportunities to engage. Okay. Another thing that's really helpful, right, is rather than saying, hey, you screwed this up, Jason, which I sometimes do, you go, hey, you know, I think you're really well positioned to handle this critique. You know, and you express confidence in the person. So rather than saying, hey, you screwed this up, you go, you're good at this. Give it a shot, right? And this is really small, but it's really helpful because most papers from submission to acceptance are around 36 months. Okay? That's a long time to sit on Zoom calls, especially if you're not nice to each other. Okay? When you document what needs to be done, keep it neutral. You know, your phone calls, you should have one person appointed to take the notes. If you're all at the same level, maybe you rotate who takes them. Usually there's one person that likes doing it, right? And in those notes, keep track of who's responsible for what. Okay. And then finally, always thank people for showing up, right? There's nothing worse than somebody taking time out of their day or to do a phone call or to sit with you and no one says thanks. And that seems like such a small thing, but manners really help. And when you say thank you, then people go, oh, I really got to do this now, right? Because you're grateful. I owe you. You know, when we know a lot about the reciprocity norm, that it's true, right? And it helps with that goal formation. Okay. And again, remember, it's us, the team, fixing this. It's not the review panel fixing this. Okay. So keep that team vibe going. Okay. Once you've got this done, you've got your 1.5-page strategy together. Maybe you've got a 30-page response document in parallel. Okay. Then you've got to communicate it to the editor. Things to remember here is, one, the editor wants to help. You would not have the revision if the editor didn't want to see you do okay. They either want to help you in your career or they want to help you publish. Sometimes it's a little confusing because the review is difficult. Okay. If you want their help, the sooner you get that revision plan to them, the better. Okay. I've had people send me revision plans 90 days after they got the revision. At that point, I don't remember their paper. Okay. If you get me that revision plan 2 to 3 weeks later, I do. Right. So share it early. Okay. And then the other piece is if you do it right and you confirm you don't need new data, and to me, that's the big bear these days, is everyone wants a second, third, or fourth study. If they do, it's better that you know it quickly, right? And if they don't, it's better that you know it quickly. And then you can reference that revision plan in the future communication with the editor, as well as to the author team. What I tend to do, if this SE gives me permission, and I do ask permission, I'll ask if I can include the revision plan as an appendix to the response document, because that makes it transparent to the AE, who may or may not read the document, and it makes it transparent to the reviewers who should never see that revision plan. But if they see that the SE signed off on this and they don't like something, usually they'll work with you because they know it's not you alone that made the decision. Okay, but right, again, execution matters. You have to get it done. Right? I get lots of revision plans with big dreams, and the papers that get rejected never realize the dream. Right? So if you don't promise something in that plan, that you're not able to deliver. Okay, so treat the strategies, to recap, it's a communication tool. It's not binding, but it's a useful reminder to the team of what you agreed to. Okay, use it to align the team on what to do, who's doing it, and when. Right? And the other piece with this, especially as you work with that corresponding response document, make the big changes into smaller things. Right? If you have to gather new data, okay, who's going to do the institutional review document? Who's going to go find money? Who's going to go grab scales? Right? Who's responsible for the cart sort? All of this comes naturally out of designing that revision doc. Okay. Create some deadlines. Okay. I usually find a 1-week deadline after the first revision plan is kind of worthless. No one's gotten anything done. Okay. Give it a couple weeks. The first author should be the person who's emailing people to remind them. If you end up with the first author who's not very interested, which does happen from time to time, the second author should step up. If you're not tenured or you're going on the job market and you're third author, maybe you step up. But give option to remind people to person 1 and person 2. If nobody's doing it, somebody's got to step up and manage the group. Okay. I find a Google Doc to be very helpful in terms of the revision plan, because everybody can get to it. Now, what I'll do is I'll put the link in the email and I'll attach a Word document or a Word version to the email as well. Because a lot of older faculty, like me, and I hate saying I'm old now, but I much prefer looking at a Word document than a Google Doc. But you provide it in multiple formats for people. Okay, and then halfway through, you're through this process. Remember, you have 6 months, right? 90 days out. Okay, you should be pretty far into the revision. Okay, and this is something I'm noticing early career people are much worse at than I like to remember and claim that I was. Okay, they tend to wait till the last 60 days to do the whole thing. You want to be almost done 60 days out, right? So 90 days out after you get that revision, it's a really good idea to schedule a meeting and say, where do we stand? And that gives you time if you have to reallocate. Okay, it gives you time to reallocate responsibilities. And that's really important. I've had papers where people have had babies, people have been divorced. I had one guy survive a murder attempt. He got nothing done on that revision. Okay, but we never would have happened if we hadn't had the call. Okay, so it's really important. Okay, and what this does at the end is it buys goodwill on the team, it leads to execution, and it gets you to publication. Okay, task 2, I'm going to run out of time, 21 minutes. Anne-Katrine told me I only got 60 to talk. Okay, so thinking through the revision. Okay, at this point, it's no longer your paper, it's our paper, right? Distribute the work and follow up on it. One person should be the primary author, one person should be responsible for writing, even if that one person is just responsible for paying a copy editor to make everyone sound consistent. Okay, but it's your paper as a group. Okay, focus on getting the edits that have to be done first done. Okay, so make it clinical. I gave Michael, I gave Rishika, I gave Oliver, I gave Anne Katrine, all of these different pieces. It doesn't matter if they're written perfectly. What matters is that they're done because we can reconcile it later, as long as all the pieces are there. Okay. Remember, as you revise the document, everything is malleable except your integrity. If they ask you to change some of the arguments about words or word choices, who cares, right? As long as they're not asking you to cook the data, right? You can't get really hung up on the words. And sometimes I run into people, including myself, that have like pet arguments about what is truth, what is real, what is this, what is that. That's a fast path to rejection. If you have a senior editor who clearly signals, this is the theory I want this piece of analysis, just do it. You know, we all know that, for example, what is it? Harman's one-factor analysis doesn't work. Like, it's debunked. Podskakov has written multiple papers. I've written a paper showing it. And yet I have reviewers that say, hey, you need to run a Harman's one-factor analysis. You know what I do? I run the stupid analysis, you know? And then I put it in the response document and I say, oh, but I don't have room in the main document for it. But if you want me to, I'll put it there. That I did it usually placates the reviewer, right? I'm not lying, but I'm just not, I'm not fighting a fight that I don't need to fight. Okay. In terms of managing co-authors, again, without blame, right? You know, when you're writing that response document, you're thinking about it, you know, the conversation isn't Jason's framing was bad, it's our framing was bad. We all own the paper, right? The manuscript, and I often do this when I'm working on paper. I no longer assign names to people and parts. The paper itself is its own person. It's the manuscript's fault. It's a lot easier to work on stuff if you're blaming the paper and you're not blaming each other. You know, it's really clarity, right? It's not that this was a bad argument. It's just we didn't signpost it well. It's not well explained. It's really easy to fix stuff if you think of it in those terms versus X, Y, or Z person let us all down. When you're working on this in the response document to each other, you know, I get people that'll say, well, this is why we did it. And if it don't, that's a waste of time. You know, what's really helpful to say is, here's how we fixed it. Right? Now, you may want to include in the response document or the conversation with each other. It's like, yeah, we did it this way for this reason. Yeah, it didn't work. So now let's try this. But don't focus on looking back. Really focus on looking forward because you don't have a lot of time. Okay. Don't think of things as concessions. And I have a friend who's a critical theorist. He does this a lot. I gave in to the editor. I improved the paper based on the editor's feedback. You need to feel good about what you're doing. Again, this all sounds like really shady wordsmithing, right? But it's not. It's like mentally engineering yourself to be resilient, in my opinion. You know, often when I have a reviewer complain about wording stuff, and you get this a lot, you know, it's like, you know, what Phil Roth taught me to say is, I can see your point. And this is his exact phrasing. Our original wording led to confusion. So we've clarified it. Our original wording often, to be quite honest, is directly from the original text by the author. It's like quoting the Bible or name your religious text. It's not worth a fight. Just let the reviewer know you heard. Okay, so common pain points that every revision has. Hopefully I'm not boring you all with things you know. Hey, every revision package in the first round, you will have a complaint about contribution. Does not matter if your work is magic. Okay, doesn't. You're always going to have someone complain. So don't take it personally. There's always going to be someone that complains about boundary conditions. I had a rejection recently on a paper, and they complained that we did not do a cross-cultural or acknowledge cross-cultural issues with our sample. Okay, everyone knows cross-cultural issues are a problem with samples. If you ever review from me, never cite that as a problem in the paper unless culture is the topic of the paper. But someone's always going to complain about the boundary conditions. Okay, these days, there are two complaints on all methods. One is robustness. You did not do the test that I was trained to do. And what's really ironic is they'll ask for robustness checks on theories and methods that don't have robustness checks. There are no robustness checks for qualitative research. There are additional interviews, right? Or you can do some interviews with people who weren't part of your sample to ask if this was okay, but it's not robustness in an empirical sense, right? But one thing that you have to be really careful with is transparency. People tend to underreport how they have the data, how they coded the data. Okay, and that piece, the robustness, you may or may not have to include in the paper, but transparency, if they ask you for how you did it, you write a really long response and you write one paragraph in the paper. And you offer to put that response as an appendix. Okay, nobody wants that transparency when they're reading your paper late at night. It's a quick way to put your reader to sleep, but the reviewer has to sleep at night knowing you did it right. That's their job. So respect it if they ask for it. Okay, lit reviews, typically people complain a lot. Okay, typically they'll say, well, you're missing this paper. Now, one of you on this call, we have what, 27, 28 people now? Okay, one of you will get a review in the next 6 months where someone complains you didn't cite a paper that was published after you submitted your work. Okay, this happens invariably, particularly when you're in the second or third round of review. Okay, just accept it. Okay, ways to get help or get through some of these issues. One is present the paper internally or at a workshop. I never present accepted papers. I fly around and present my work so that people can tell me what's wrong with it. Okay, it's not always comfortable, but it's higher in integrity because you're getting honest feedback. You can see in people's faces as they watch you present if they believe in your argument. And if everybody's looking at you with a stone face, you're screwed. Like you have not engaged them, right? So you've got to find that hook. Okay, ask colleagues for feedback on stuck points. Typically with colleagues and stuck points, let me be very clear here. It's not big picture. What's my contribution? What's my theory? It's very focused things. They asked me to do this particular test. Do you know anything about it? Okay, because often they're asking for something, and this is a peril of modernity, is it used to be when we trained reviewers, we told them, include the citations for the test you want. Since COVID, nobody is. Like I get whole review packages with no citations. It's really not a good practice, okay? But so your colleagues may be able to help you figure that out, okay? And then the other thing is, and this is the benefit of giving the talk or talking to a colleague, and if they invite a larger conversation, join it. Fresh eyes can really help you get through something that seems really difficult. And sometimes, honestly, it's just you're feeling down and you haven't let that self-esteem rebound yet. And the colleague can go, yeah, that's not a big deal. I dealt with that in this paper. Here, go look at it. And you see it and you go, oh, it's 2 sentences? Geesh. Right? So just take the time to find extra eyes. Okay. Task 3, and I think this, again, most important part. 12 minutes should get us through it. Okay. The first thing is your response document will determine whether you're in a death spiral or you're in a recovery curve. Okay, if you're defensive in that response document, unless you have a very nice SE, the party is over. Okay, if you go in and say, yeah, you got this wrong, you're going to get the reviewer frustrated, even if you're correct, and you will have a rejection. On the other hand, if we strategically say, yeah, we see your point, so we went and we pulled those papers. Again, this is what Phil Roth taught me, and we did go pull the papers, and we couldn't really map them to what we're doing, and here's why. Right? Remember, your reviewer is somebody who's writing this response to your work, usually at night, usually off the payroll, usually for going dinner with their partner, or beer with their friends, a football match. Right? They want to know you listened. Okay. And if you're actually proactive and you respond in a really nice way, your next round usually is much more constructive. First round reviews are either optimistic or negative, and usually more negative than optimistic. Second round, they either double down on the hate, or you start seeing them pivot because you showed you're responsive. And I've seen really mean first round reviewers in the last couple of years, if you do the method stuff they ask for, really soften in the next round. Okay, so take that time to be strategic and be constructive in responding. Okay. So writing that response document, what I suggest everyone do, and this is not quarterly policy, this is not ISR policy, this is Jason Thatcher policy. Okay, don't confound me with the editor in chief. Okay, that first page everybody reads in the review team. It's really important. So take the time to write a really crisp summary of what we did. And don't say we changed everything. Those 5 points in that response document you came up with, 5 short paragraphs with pages to where they're addressed. Okay. Then in the following pages, you break that review package out into SC comments, AE comments, R1, R2, R3, R4, RN, whatever it is, right? Okay. And each comment has a response to it. Okay. Sometimes you'll say, this is no longer an issue because the SE asks us to cut that out of the paper. But this is a really good point. And if we write another paper on this topic, we're going to be certain to weave it in. Right? If they took the time to provide you the feedback, you take the time to say thank you. Okay, do not use really florid language in that point by point. Like for me, because I literally I have weeks where I do 3 to 5 SE reports. I really appreciate it if the authors just say thank you. Here's what we did. Not thank you. You're thinking change the world for me, and the moon and the stars now rise in your presence. Because I get packages like that. Just a very concise thank you. I appreciate that, right? Because I can see it's genuine, right? And that authenticity comes through. But don't miss anything. Now, I've also seen authors in my time as an SC where they'll delete comments out of a review package. And you really want to see an angry reviewer? Yeah, I went back and compared the review I sent to the review you responded to. It's missing point 3 and 4. What happened? The second that happens, the whole panel will turn on you, right? Because they think you're gaming it. So don't. Okay. A strong response typically will quote the reviewer's comment. You'll say, this is what we did. You'll show exactly where you went. And if you didn't do it or you couldn't do it, you very diplomatically explain why you did or didn't do it. This is the most important slide in the entire presentation. Okay, because if you do this to each point, that response document's really easy to write. Okay, phrases that work. And I've given you a bunch already. We thank the reviewers for this valuable suggestion. Notice that's not real wordy, right? In response, we did this. To clarify this point, we revised the discussion on page 14. We now state. After you now state it, you say, if this isn't enough, please let us know. We're happy to make more changes. Okay, we understand the reviewer's concern. However, due to data limitations, we instead did this X, Y, or Z. Okay, so you're never tearing anyone down. Okay. Things that you don't say, and I call these traps. Don't say we disagree. Okay, your impulse may want to be to say we disagree. Culturally, there are some countries that I go to and I operate in where saying we disagree is a sign of love, right? Where you get along. But in international academic English, we disagree is like giving someone the bird. Just don't. Say we appreciate your concern and we've clarified the document and explain what you did. Okay. The minor points sometimes are the most important points. Okay, so make sure that you've read them. Like I go through my documents, you'll have a reviewer, they'll give you one paragraph with 10 different points. I'll be like 0.3a, 3.3b, 3.3c, 3.3e, and so on. Notice I missed D there. That wasn't on purpose. But go through and just break it out. And sometimes those can be very concise things, but it shows you're thorough. Okay. The other piece to do here, you need to acknowledge and say you're willing to keep changing. Right. So you go, we recognize there may be other interpretations to how we did, and we're open to make additional adjustments if you want us to. Now, you don't really want to, right? Ever. You want this to be done. But you're not the boss. They're the boss. So if you signal willingness, they're more likely to give you the suggestions you need. At the end of that first one-page letter, every single time, we welcome further guidance from the review team. And honestly, as skeptical as I'm sounding a little bit here, I really mean that when we write that as a team. We'd much rather get more guidance than rejected. And again, Phil Roth always says, acceptances are a function of not rejections. Keep the conversation going. So really welcome it. And if you get it, use it. Okay. Convey a collaborative tone. We hope our revisions move the paper in the directions you envisioned. Now, the paper is your paper. It should go in the direction you envision, but reviewers by the third round feel quite vested in you, right? And they, at this point, a good reviewer will have put 20 to 30 hours into reading and thinking about your paper. That's often more than the fourth author has for the whole project. Okay. So really think that through, right? At the end of your response document, at that very, very last thing, to each person, the SE, the AE, each reviewer, okay, we're happy to make additional revisions if you think it's appropriate. Okay, now I maybe I'm a bad reviewer. Often I read the SE report, I'll read the AE report, and then my review I read, and I ignore reviewer 2 and 3. Right? Each one of those responses to each person in the section, write that to that person. Explain why you're doing it to that person. So that final piece, we're happy to make additional revisions. You do that for every person because they may not see it at the other touch points. Okay, remember, okay, flexibility builds trust and it keeps the door open for a smoother next round. If you come across as inflexible, and I've done this, so it's a mistake I made a lot in my life, they push back and go, you suck. No, they're not willing. And this is usually the kiss of death. You won't see it, but in the confidential comments in both ISR, GIS, and MIS Quarterly have it. They have a section for confidential comments. The person will write you a very nice and diplomatic review package. And in the private comments to say, I wrote a nice package because we're supposed to be nice, but I just don't see them making the changes. They don't feel willing to. You do not want to evoke that response because those private comments, and it may feel unfair that they exist, but they're there so that the reviewer can be candid. Those will frame how the SE handles the paper. Okay, so be nice and flexible and say, we're happy to keep working with you. Okay, and remember, most quarterlies take 3 to 4 rounds, sometimes 5, 6, or 7. Okay, but once you're past the third, you're most likely to get accepted. Okay, once you're past the second, you're in a pretty good place. And then the first, who knows? Okay, you're still playing roulette. You never know the ball will bounce. Okay, 3 golden rules, and I'm almost done. I might make it in an hour. Okay, first, don't fight with the reviewers. This is obvious, right? The second, when you disagree with the reviewer, put citations in. The reviewer may not have used citations. If you use citations, it gives them an understanding of where you came from. The third piece, always explain what you didn't do. Give a logic for it. They took the time, even if it was a flip comment, they took the time to give it to you. Just explain why you didn't do it. And it can't be I ran out of time. It can't be it cost too much. Okay, because what you'll find is that a lot of reviewers go, well, in MIS Quarterly, where I'm at right now, that's worth $1 million. Yeah, it's not. But money isn't a good excuse. Okay, I want to conclude with a plea. Write the reviews you want to have. Early career people are the meanest reviewers in the universe. You are all little piranhas growing up to be big piranhas sometimes. Don't. Right? Reviewing is supposed to help you get better, and seeing how other people review and respond will make you better. Okay, it will help you learn to do revisions and be successful. But if you show empathy, and I really believe this, we have an opportunity to create virtuous cycles in our field. You can say no, but say it nicely. And if you're going to say no, say it with citations. Like, let people know why. Don't just say, well, everybody knows this. Sometimes they don't. And remember, this is a discipline that's scattered across the global north, the global south, and then everybody has the access to the same resources, the same citations, or even the same conferences. You can be a little bit educational in how you write that response and how you write your reviews. My final thought, Revisions are hard. I still get mad when I get them, but it's how good papers get great. Okay. The reviewers are your collaborators. They may not be your co-authors, but they're your collaborators in getting this process done. They are not your adversaries. You may feel like some of them are. Okay. And in fact, you will probably someday end up at a conference complaining about a reviewer, and that will be the person that you're talking to. This has happened to me more than once. Okay. But I'm not there because I hate your work. I'm there because I want your work to be good so you're not embarrassed when it's published. Okay. And your best paper, invariably, I've never had a paper come out of the revision process worse, ever. It's not always the paper I wanted to write, but it's often a much more coherent project or much better. And that's it. Any questions? And now you can complain about reviewer 2, right? But that's all I have.